What's going on, everybody? This is Dean with Blue Ridge Overland Gear, and this is the third installment of our series on trail etiquette. And this one is going to be on traveling in a group or kind of a convoy situation and some of the etiquette that's involved with that, and just kind of to help, again, that group experience be a positive one. And the first one that I'm going to say is limit the size of the group. I know some of us are super popular and we want to go out with our friends that we haven't seen in a while, and that's not to say that you can't travel kind of in a big group and rendezvous, but when you're actually out traveling, it's a lot easier if you're traveling in small groups. So personally speaking, I really like to have a group of about 5 to 6 vehicles. Anything more than that, it just becomes harder to manage, and also the impact is going to be greater. One of the important things when traveling in a group is communication, and one of the ways that this is handled is through what I like to refer to as a driver's meeting, and that is before you set out for the day, you get all the drivers and the navigators together, and you do the simple things like making sure everybody has the right communications, they're on the right radio channels, and also that everybody knows the route. And one of the things that I always like to do is establish a safety officer. Now, everybody has a right to call a stop in an emergency situation, but a safety officer is also the person that kind of looks at the whole group, watches things that are going, and they just have a little bit more of a purposeful eye on things. And usually the person that ends up being the safety officer is usually the person that has the most first aid skills, or first responder, something like that, or the most experience in group management in a crisis or something like that. But it is kind of important to have that identified when you're in a group, just because, again, it helps with managing the group, and if something does go wrong, that can happen. But communication is kind of the forefront of that, and making sure that everybody knows where you're going, making sure the route has been shared with everybody, also that you have a backup plan. If the group gets separated, where are you going? I know some people like to do cute little things like, keep the route hidden, or they don't want to divulge what the campsites are. If you're traveling in a group, you want to make sure you're sharing your route, you're sharing your destination, and you have a backup plan that if you get separated, if for some reason comms stop working, everybody knows where you're going and how to get there. The other thing about traveling in a group that is a nice trail etiquette thing is calling out turns. So when you're coming up on a turn and you're the lead guy, you want to call out, hey, I'm making a turn onto Trail A.
17 south, that right after you take that left.
And then make sure people in the group are repeating that, so that the person in the middle of the group, the person in the back of the group is echoing that they confirm that. And that's just kind of one of those things that, again, that's important when you're talking about group communications. The other thing you want to do is call out things like obstacles and oncoming traffic. So if you're on a trail and you're heading towards something and somebody's coming the other way, let everyone else know behind you in your group, hey, there's an oncoming car. Because again, you might have a blind turn or a blind hill. You want to make sure, like we said in the last video, everybody's riding or driving to the right. And it just kind of gives people a heads up and says, hey, there's oncoming traffic. Now, speaking of oncoming traffic, one of the things that you want to communicate to that oncoming traffic is how many people are in your group. Now, again, I kind of hinted that, a group size of about 5 to 6 is really good. That's because the hand signals that people use when traveling in a group is they hold out how many fingers of the number of vehicles that are behind them. So if you're in a group of 6, I'm the lead guy, I put out 5. That lets the people coming the other way know there are 5 more vehicles behind me. The next person behind me will hold out a 4, letting that person know there's 4 more vehicles behind them, and so forth, to the point where you get down to the last vehicle is just going to hold out a closed fist and let them know, hey, I'm the last vehicle, there's nobody else behind me. And that just kind of lets into those yield scenarios of, hey, if that person's nice enough to pull over and let all of you by, let them know, hey, I'm the last vehicle, or there's 3 more, or 2 more vehicles behind me, just so they know that when that last person goes by, now it's their turn to go. And also too, you get into that scenario of 2 groups coming at each other to help mitigate and prevent gridlock. The larger group is going to have the right of way. So if your group has 5 or 6 people and the other group only has 2, those 2 people can pull off to the side of the trail and do less damage and let the larger group go by and stay on the trail. The other thing about traveling in a group etiquette wise is both the spacing and pacing of the group. Now, when you start traveling in larger and larger groups, it actually gets really hard to stay together. So again, going back to the beginning of this video, one of the reasons to keep a smaller group is it's much easier to stay together and it's much easier to travel at a more reasonable pace. I've been part of some convoy groups with 30 vehicles in them. Trust me, you end up going ridiculously slow because everybody's trying to keep the group together. It's much easier to have 3 or 4 smaller groups of smaller numbers of vehicles that are easier to manage and can maybe take different routes and all rendezvous in one location than everybody trying to bottleneck through on the same trail. Now, how do you control pacing? Well, there's a couple different ways you can control pacing, and the first one is slow down. I know a lot of us like to go fast, you know, and some of us will maybe hit that little 5 extra or 10 extra on the speed limit. That's fine on the highway. But again, when you're on back roads, when you're on unimproved roads, trails, those sorts of things, you want to travel slow, again, out of respect for other people, out of respect for the terrain, but also for the people that are traveling with you. You don't want to outpace them or anything like that, and you want to make sure you're having an enjoyable ride. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to keep 2 vehicles in the rearview mirror when possible, because one, it's going to help keep the group together and it prevents that lead vehicle from outpacing the vehicles in the back, but also it's going to help with communicating turns. So when you come up to a turn and you physically make that turn, if you saw the 2 vehicles behind you, that means they can see you and they can see you make that turn. Now, one of the ways to increase visibility with having vehicles in the rearview mirror is having your headlights on. That is one of the first things I always tell people when you're traveling in a group with me: lights on for safety. It makes you more visible to oncoming traffic. It also makes you more visible to people in your group. And when you get into dusty environments, those lights really, really help. I remember traveling out west. I was in a very dusty area and the dust had that brown, kind of almost earthy tone to it. And my buddy's tan Tacoma disappeared, gone, couldn't see it. And once I got on the radio and I was like, hey dude, turn your headlights on, turn your tail lights on, then I was actually able to see the vehicle. And also one of the things you'll see out west that's very popular on a lot of vehicles that travel in those dusty environments are amber lights, because amber lights will cut through the dust. So you'll see people that have amber fog lights on the front, or may even have amber lights mounted on the back of their vehicle, which makes them a little bit more visible in dusty environments. It also works in smoke, it works in rain, it works in fog. It's just kind of one of those things. The lights are on, makes the vehicle more visible. The last thing to talk about with group etiquette and traveling in a convoy is gaps. Most of the time you want to make sure you have the 2 vehicles in view behind you, but sometimes you need to have a gap. Dust is one of those situations where you might want to space out, and if you have radio comms, you can stay in contact that way, or maybe keep one vehicle in view behind you. But the other thing you want to make sure you give a gap for is when you're going downhill. Sometimes vehicles will lock their brakes and slide, and the last thing you want to do is be stacked up on top of each other. I remember one time I was on a winter trail ride. We were at an off-road park. We were going downhill, and I told the guy driving, I said, make sure you don't hit your brakes and lock them up. Of course, what did he do? He hit his brakes, he locked them up, and we basically slid downhill. We hit the vehicle in front of us. They started sliding. They hit the vehicle in front of them. You don't want to be that person, trust me. But also it kind of goes well, and again, in those dusty environments, you want to make sure you're giving that person enough time to react, and also give yourself enough time to react if there's a hazard or an obstacle or something like that. Ultimately, the catch-all, the go-to, the foundation for any type of trail etiquette when traveling in a group is going to be communication. So a lot of the stuff I just talked about, calling out turns, calling out obstacles, giving vehicles spacing when in dust or going downhill, all boils down to communication. And if you are going to be that person that's in the lead of the group, if you're the one that's going to take charge and you're going to be the Pied Piper that everybody is going to follow, you want to make sure you're showing a little bit of initiative and sharing that kind of information. Let people know, hey, there's an obstacle up ahead. Does somebody want to get out and spot? Or hey, we come up on a downhill section. Increase the pacing between vehicles, 2 vehicle lengths or 3 vehicle lengths, or hey, wait till we get to the bottom of the hill and either beep the horn or call out on the radio that it's safe for the next vehicle to go. Also, if you're in the back of the group and you can't see the 2 vehicles ahead of you and you're supposed to be kind of tight knit, Get on the radio and communicate and say, hey, you know, our group's getting spread out. I can't see the people in front of me. Or if you're the person in the front, you can't see the people behind you. Communicate those sorts of things. So ultimately, a lot of this trail etiquette stuff is going to boil down to communication, and any effort you can put into, like I said earlier, a driver's meeting can often save you a lot of headache when traveling in a group. So this wraps up our short little video on trail etiquette when traveling in a group. In the next video, we're going to take a look at camping etiquette and how that kind of relates to what we do as overland travel enthusiasts. And you're gonna see some familiar themes pop up in that video, but it's gonna kind of be a nice way to wrap up this 4-part series on trail etiquette.